Our dear president has pronounced that this year it's okay to say Merry Christmas and not okay to say Happy Holidays, which is kind of strange because from November 1st to January 15th, there are 29 holidays observed by 7 of the world's major religions. And somehow Merry Christmas doesn't include very much. And I don't think that anybody should think that theirs is the only one that counts. So on that note, I came across this reading. There used to be a newspaper called the Liberal Opinion Week. Did any of you ever get it? A parishioner of mine gave me one year for Christmas a subscription, and I subscribed ever since until they stopped printing it. No offense, but happy holiday. If a war on Christmas actually exists, it began with Bing Crosby and a Jew. Crosby and composer Irving Berlin didn't mean to wage war on Christmas. They meant to have a hit song, and White Christmas was that. In a PBS documentary about Crosby, biographer Gary Giddens calls the song the most popular recording of all time, the first to secularize Christmas. Imagine a Christmas where snowflakes are the central actors, where a season of goodwill can be rationalized just because it feels right. And among those feeling it, what? A Jewish composer. Yes, but Berlin wasn't the only one. He was among several Jewish composers writing popular Christmas songs. White Christmas, Let It Snow, I'll Be Home for Christmas, Silver Bells, and Chestnuts Roasting on an Open Fire. Lauren McCoe writes about this for Religion News Service. In their music and lyrics, Jews captured Christmas not only as a wonderful wintry time for family gatherings, but also as an American holiday. An American holiday, a warm and welcoming holiday. In those terms, the greeting Happy Holidays isn't the affront that some make it out to be, a season co-opted and corrupted by the masses. Sorry, but the holidays as practiced here are a manifestation of us, a nation of difference. When I hear that the secularization of Christmas is a problem, I think the man after whom it was named would come up with bigger problems. If Christmas, or Hanukkah, which starts tomorrow, or Kwanzaa, name it whatever, is a reason for scattered families to assemble, miracles not possible except for this time of year, that's sufficient reason for the season. If it's cause for people to greet each other with general decency, even when the decency is wholly secular and holiday related, and when a guess isn't necessary as to which greeting would offend, a season that inspires happy holidays is a very good thing. The song From a Distance, written by Julie Gold and popularized by voices like those of Bette Midler and Nancy Griffith and Lady Gaga recently, isn't a Christmas song, but it could be. Gold's masterpiece observes that at any moment from a distance, we aren't a bunch of rivals or enemies, warriors or worshipers in clashing colors. We are tightly bunched and at peace. Imagine how, from a distance, the smattering of lights that grace each neighborhood over the holidays, whether they be from front yard nativities or inflatable Santas, or menorahs on window ledges, all merge to provide communal fields of sparkle. From a distance, you look like my friend, even though we are at war. From a distance, I just cannot comprehend what all this fighting is for. On such a note, that secularizing tune, that American tune, White Christmas, was released in 1942, the first and worst year for our forces in World War II. By all accounts, Crosby's song was a major morale builder. Homesick soldiers of every creed and ethos felt as one singing it. Whatever the season means to you and me individually, I invite you to appreciate and celebrate what it means to all of us collectively. So, today is the first day of the season that Christians call Advent, the 4 weeks before Christmas when Christians prepare for the coming of Christ. It's interesting that there is no mention of Jesus' coming in the New Testament. In fact, only 2 of the 4 Gospels even mention his birth. Mark, the first to be written, says nothing about Jesus' birth, beginning its story with his deeds as a man. So, contrary to what we might think now, there was no great anticipation or waiting for the coming of a Savior at the time. In fact, it was so unexpected that when Jesus was born, his parents couldn't even get a room at the inn. In the earliest Christian church, there was no concern at all over Jesus' birth or the date on which he was born. No one knew or cared that it had taken place. At that time, the celebration of birthdays, all birthdays, was looked upon as a pagan and undesirable custom. The great Christian leader Origen pointed out that only the bad characters in the Bible, like Pharaoh and Herod, celebrated their birthdays. So the early church, feeling that birth was too carnal a matter for celebration, concentrated upon Jesus' baptism, the Epiphany for emphasis. When the Catholic Church did decide to honor the birthday of him who they worship, they had to fix a date since it was not known. They depended on numerology and astrology, and various dates in March, April, and May had supporters, partly because the rebirth of nature in the spring seemed to be an appropriate time for the coming of the one who would redeem the world. A spring season was also, it would seem, in the mind of the person who first set down the story of the shepherds and the angels, for in the area around Bethlehem, the shepherds are in the fields keeping watch over their flocks by night only in the spring and summer, never in the cold winter season. But later tradition began to transfer the birth of Jesus to the winter, and the date of January 6th was decided upon, taking over the Feast of Dionysus, observed in Greece as part of the celebration of the lengthening of the days. This worked fine for the eastern part of the Roman Empire, but when Christianity became the official religion, the most important center was Rome itself. And so the primary Roman holiday, Natalis Invicti, held on December 25th, was adopted. Sir James Frazer uncovered the words of a Syrian Christian at the time who explained it thus: "The reason why the fathers transferred the birth of Christ was because it was a custom of the heathen to celebrate on the 25th of December the birthday of the sun, at which they kindled lights in token of a festivity. In these festivities, Christians also took part. Accordingly, when the doctors of the church perceived that the Christians had a leaning toward this festival, they took counsel and resolved that the true nativity should be solemnized on that day and the festival of the Epiphany on the 6th of January. So the festival was moved, and before long, Augustine was warning the people not to worship the sun on December 25th, but rather him who created the sun. It was not easy to get people to change, and there was still confusion and competing holidays as Christianity spread throughout the world. And after the Reformation, many Protestants tried to abolish Christmas, feeling it was a papish holiday. In England, the Puritans denounced it as a wanton bacchanalian feast, and celebrating Christmas was forbidden by an act of Parliament. The first pilgrims in America neglected Christmas completely, and the General Court of Massachusetts passed a law which made feasting on Christmas Day punishable by the stocks. It was because Americans did not celebrate Christmas that General George Washington was able to cross the Delaware River on December 25th and surprise and rout the Hessian troops who had supposed that there would be no fighting on Christmas Day and had celebrated with too much rum and revelry. In order to accommodate all the various pagan festivals and winter solstice celebrations throughout Christendom, the church needed to expand the celebration of Jesus' birth into a seasonal celebration. Carrying it out to Epiphany, or Twelfth Night, January 6th, helped some, but many local festivals were underway before December 25th, so that date had lesser significance than the church fathers had wanted. The addition of Advent solved the problem. The 4 weeks before Jesus' supposed birth were to be devoted to getting ready, preparing spiritually, praying, focusing, getting one's life in order, and so on. It was to be a time of anticipation and expectation and preparation for the coming of the Messiah. Now, it seems to me that it would be difficult for people to prepare for something that they did not know was going to happen, and even more questionable to prepare for something that happened on an entirely different date than the one they were getting ready for. So I assume, and history bears me out, that what Christians call Advent was really, in the minds of the early peoples, the finishing up of the old year and the getting ready for the new. It was preparation and anticipation of the solstice, when the seasons would turn, and the days would begin to lengthen, and the hope of spring would come. What they were waiting for was the coming of the new sun, S-U-N, not the sun, S-O-N. Advent, then, is less a Christian phenomenon than it is a natural one. And it is certain that the Advent wreath, with its 4 candles and one in the middle, is taken from the star wheel, with its 4 lights representing the seasons, and in the one in the middle representing the birth of the sun. Then, as now, the pagan traditions and festivals and the Christian holidays and customs are so intertwined as to be almost inseparable. And perhaps that is why Advent has had a difficult time of it. Many Christians ignore it altogether. Churches are as apt to celebrate the solstice and Hanukkah, both of which occur during Advent, as they are Advent itself. For much of this pre-Christmas time, we get not even a hint of baby Jesus. One Sunday school teacher announced to her class that Advent meant coming, and then asked, "Who is coming?" And in one chorus, the children answered, Then she went around the circle and tried to be more specific. Advent means that we are waiting for Christmas. What happens at Christmas? One child said, "Grandma comes and stays and takes out her teeth." Another said, "We get lots of presents." Another, "We have a big dinner and lots of cookies and candy." Finally, the teacher gave up. Just like a big dinner and lots of cookies and candy. Just like my friend Tom, the Presbyterian minister in Mankato I went to school with. He wanted to buy an Advent calendar to use with his junior high group. And he went from store to store asking for one. Mostly the clerks didn't know what he was talking about. Well, finally he went to Hallmark, and after he described it, the clerk sent him to the right area, and then he understood why nobody knew what an Advent calendar was. They were under the heading Countdown to Christmas calendars. And when he looked at them, there was not one picture that had anything to do with Jesus' birth. As Tom told me this, I started laughing. In fact, I got the giggles. Tom was incensed. He could not understand why I did not share his outrage at this sacrilege, this secularizing of Christmas. He really became quite angry with me. Well, since I value Tom as a friend, I thought a lot about why the lack of attention to the proper Advent did not upset me. I guess it's because it is an artificially constructed thing in the first place, put at the wrong time of the year for the preparation for Jesus' birth, and as such, it almost seems appropriate that it should be forgotten. But the main problem I have with this whole thing is that, to me, the reason to celebrate a birth is to honor a life. After their deaths, we only continue to note the birthdays of people who have done something important and made a difference. And certainly Jesus did that. But what bothers me is that very little attention is paid to what he did, why it is important to remember his birth. Indeed, Christianity has developed this religion about Jesus, not of Jesus. Much more is said about his birth and death than about his life. In one sense, I agree with Tom. There's too much about the countdown to Christmas time that is blasphemous. The frost was hardly off the Halloween pumpkins before the malls and the television channels were awash in red and green plastic, tacky tinsel, mushy melodies, and slightly seedy men in red pillow-stuffed pajamas trying to ho-ho-ho their way into our wallets. Each year, the Christmas season seems more suffocated beneath the crush of commercialism and consumerism that merchandisers cynically heap upon it. It is harder and harder to find those hushed, magic moments amidst all the holiday hype and hassle. Profit-hungry retailers and manufacturers fully admit that they do all they can to fuel the Christmas machine. And in these shaky economic times, many fear that the frenzied consumer buying of December is all that stands between them and bankruptcy. And who has come to be the very center and symbol of all this seasonal excess and emptiness? Santa Claus, that's who. The pudgy fellow whose mission seems to be to make us spend ourselves into debt. While the Christmas of Jesus is supposed to be about birth, wonder, parenting, faithfulness, hope, justice, nurture, peace, and love, the Christmas of Santa Claus has become all about buying and consuming booze, food, perfume, clothing, electronics, and other extravagances. But, like Jesus, Santa Claus has been sold down the river. His name is a corruption of the Dutch name for St. Nicholas. The real Santa, St. Nicholas, like the real Jesus, has been so distorted and perverted that he's no longer recognizable. The real Santa, like the real Jesus, led a life that was worthy of celebrating. In fact, his life was honored by granting him sainthood, although Pope John Paul II revoked his saint status, presumably because his life was too much like Jesus' life, and the Pope was afraid of the competition. But he's still revered in many places, especially Holland. In fact, I heard on the radio the other day that the city council in Amsterdam had decreed that all Christmas decorations were to be removed and all Christmas hoopla stopped until after St. Nicholas's birthday, which is December 6th, because it was taking away from the importance of celebrating his life. Yes, Virginia, there really is a Santa Claus. He was born around the year 280 of wealthy Christian parents in the port city of Patara in what is now Turkey, and he was named Nicholas. Early in his childhood, his devout mother carefully taught him the scriptures, including the gospel narratives which tell the story of Jesus' ministry of love, justice, and sharing. Too soon, both of his parents died, leaving him an orphan in possession of their great wealth. As a boy, Nicholas had wandered the streets of Patara and observed how many people were living in horrible poverty and deprivation, and he'd been embarrassed by his own fortune. So he decided to dedicate his life to God. Remembering from the scriptures that Jesus demanded that those who sought to follow him should give up their wealth and possessions, Nicholas decided that it was his duty to give all of his family's money away to those in great need. So as not to receive praise for his giving, Nicholas assumed disguises and gave small sacks of gold to the poor and needy. And when it came time for the Christian people of Myra to replace their bishop who had died, they chose Nicholas. Some said he was chosen by divine providence, but I suspect his disguises were not completely effective, and the people knew the identity of their kind benefactor and wanted so Christian an individual to be their bishop. Nicholas was a good and popular bishop, and legends grew about his many miraculous feats. It was said that he calmed ocean storms to save sailors' lives, that he had the power to bring dead people back to life, and that during one famine he saved the people by magically multiplying the grain. Myths abound everywhere, but it is true that all throughout his life he remained the protector of the poor and the powerless. He donned his bishop's robes and went out on the streets, giving gifts to the needy and the children, always the children. For centuries, millions of human beings over the world have held St. Nicholas close to their hearts. To children around the globe, St. Nick will always be the most loving and kind of personalities, a special person who unconditionally brings them gifts and makes them feel valued. He will always be revered because he was very like Jesus. So how did we get from the deeply religious Nicholas, who was skinny as a rail because he fasted regularly so his physical desire for food would not distract him from the pure spiritual demands of the Christian life, to the jolly, roly-poly man in the red suit that has taken his place? Our Santa looks like he never passed up a meal in his life. This Santa has little to do with service or sacrifice for others. He symbolizes our private desire to be generous to that small group of family and friends we gather around ourselves. Santa still represents love and generosity, but what a shift away from the nearly boundless spiritual vision of the human family to which Nicholas, like Jesus, devoted his life. The physical transformation of St. Nick from ascetic saint to corpulent consumerist was due mostly to two men. Thomas Nast, who drew a cartoon in 1863 picturing a jolly Santa in a red suit, and Dr. Clement Moore, who wrote "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." But the physical change in Santa had a corresponding spiritual shift. Nicholas, the compassionate and devout bishop who dedicated his life to the selfless giving that was at the moral center of the religion of Jesus, lived the life of a radical Christian, humbly following the pure example of Jesus, neglecting his own personal needs and wants as he cared for the poorest of creation's children. But that image has been supplanted by a private and secular Santa Claus who is kind, warm, and fuzzy, and brings us lots of nice things. After all, pure and original Christianity, the religion of Jesus, not the one about Jesus, seems to us today to be wildly idealistic, hopelessly visionary, and practically undoable. In these times, people resist the idea that they should or even can personally care for the poor and downtrodden. It should not surprise us then that today's Christmas almost entirely avoids the spiritual and moral examples of Jesus of Nazareth and Nicholas of Myra. The original Christmas message, the religion of Jesus, is about expanding the hearth of our hearts beyond our private little circle of family and friends, widening our sphere of responsibility to include all humans as brothers and sisters, however poor or desperate. This is a demanding message most of us would sooner forget, but it is the real message of Christmas, as exemplified in the life of St. Nicholas. We need to keep his message and spirit alive. But we also need Santa Claus. Santa represents gentleness, kindness, acceptance, and grace. He reminds us that it's also good to receive gifts from others. Good old jolly Santa reminds us that we are all loved and cared for, which is not all bad. He visits every home and leaves something for every person, reminding us that we are all valuable. Santa does not separate people into rich and poor. He loves us all, and he is a positive presence in our holiday celebration. Santa and St. Nicholas. Together, they give us wholeness and hope during this wonderful season. The holy healing trick is to expand and extend our compassion to the whole of humanity, even as we embrace and enjoy our own circles of family and friends. Only in that dynamic and divine tension will we discover the true meaning of these holy days. So Christmas will be here soon, 4 weeks. Who's coming to your house? Will it be St. Nicholas or Jesus with their examples of helping others? Will it be Santa Claus with his message of love and greed? Will it be the Grinch or Scrooge trying to spoil the spirit of Christmas? Maybe it'll be Grandma or Cousin Kate or the kids or grandchildren. Or best of all, maybe you can welcome all of them, if not in person, at least in your hearts. For Christmas is about sharing, helping, loving, and accepting. Whoever comes to your house, I hope you will have a merry and balanced holiday.